Hi everyone, my name is Steve Beckow and I'm the founding editor of the Golden Age of Gaia. And what I'd like to do today is to relate some learnings, some realizations that I came to as a result pardon me, of a spiritual experience that I had on February 13th, 1987, from which I emerged feeling certain that I knew what the purpose of life was. In other words, the content of the vision, well, the content of the vision was to demonstrate what the purpose of life was for each individual soul. And I don't, pardon me, I don't want to go right through the vision itself. You can read about the vision if you go to the Golden Age of Gaia.com site, and in the search box in the upper right-hand corner, enter ch.13 epilogue, which means chapter 13 epilogue, and it's the last chapter of the book, The Purpose of Life is Enlightenment. Now, this last chapter gives you the content of the vision. But in the very briefest of terms, what the vision showed was the progress of an individual soul from God out into the world through lifetimes in matter until it had the first of a number of levels of enlightenment, realized something of its true identity, and then left the world of matter and streaked back to the large golden star, which was the vision's representation of God. So what it showed me is that the total journey that we follow, lifetime after lifetime, could be described as going from God to God. And it had us go out into the world and learn. And the world is a school of experience, and learn about our true identity. The whole purpose of life was to learn our true identity, and our true identity is God. Now, for those who don't want to think of themselves as God, well, you can think of yourself as a child of God or as a fragment of God. But then, if you remember that everything in the world is God, then it shouldn't be too much of a stretch of the imagination to think, that we ourselves are God. If everything is God, then why would we not be God as well? The actors in this tableau that I saw were a large golden sun. Now, I should mention that I was filled with bliss for the whole 8 seconds of this vision. And as you know, bliss, according to Jesus, brings all things to remembrance. It increases our ability to know. So I knew who the actors in this tableau were. There was a large golden sun, which I knew to be what Christians call God the Father, and what Hindus call Brahman. Out from that large golden sun was a small golden star, which I knew immediately to be, Christians call it God the Son. You could call it the Self. You could call it, what Hindus call it, the Atman. And that streaked off into space, and I found that I had the ability to move instantaneously through space to wherever I wanted to go. And so I asked myself where it had gone, and I immediately saw that it had gone vast distances and was now immersed in a kind of a cloud, which I knew to be what Christians call the Holy Spirit, what Hindus call Shakti or energy, and they also call it the Divine Mother. And it was going down through coils, which I knew to be lifetimes in matter. So I had now identified the 3 actors in this drama. God the Father, the Self, God the Son, you could call it the Christ. There's so many names for it. You could call it the Pearl of Great Price, or the treasure buried in the field. The field is the body, or specifically the heart, and the self, the child of God, is, so to speak, buried in the heart. You could call it the mustard seed that grew into great tree, the great fish among fish. Jesus talked about it quite a bit. In other words, he talked about the Christ, the self, the child of God, a great deal. And much of what he told about in his parables was how that child of God could complete the journey from God to God. So the New Testament then, viewed from one angle, is a discussion of how we can complete the purpose of life, journeying from God to God, realizing our true essence, realizing that we are God. Now, once this vision was over, well, it ended when the child of God returned to the Father and disappeared, and I found myself saying, oh, okay, well then, the purpose of life is enlightenment. And that is the purpose of life when viewed from our perspective. Now, when viewed from God's own perspective, I imagine, and I say this based on readings of the enlightened masters of all ages, because for the 10 years following this vision, I did nothing but read the enlightened works of masters of all ages. From God's perspective, the purpose of life is for God to meet God. Now again, if you think of it for a moment, supposing this room is all there is, and supposing that God is all there is, then God would fill this whole room, and there would be no place where God was not. If that's the case, where's the place for another? There is no place for another. God fills this whole room. Where is there place for a mirror? Where's there place for a camera? Such as the one I'm speaking into now. There is no place. The only way that God could meet God was to create temporary beings, illusory beings, dream beings. Supposing I painted pictures on each of my fingers and called them finger puppets. If one of my fingers could realize me, this would be about the situation of us realizing that we're God. We're like the finger, we're connected to the body, we're connected to God, and we're not really separate from God. We aren't separate at all from God. We're a part of God. And so if a finger puppet realized God, that's about the situation that we're in, realizing God ourselves. When we realize God, God has an experience of himself, herself, itself. God has no gender. God, since God is all there is, then the Holy Spirit is also God. The child of God is God. All of space was God. The only thing I didn't focus on in this vision was the blackness behind all these figures. Of course, if I had, then I'd be looking at God in God's formless identity. But I wasn't fast enough to think of focusing on the darkness. God is, in God's native form, formless, transcendent. It isn't that there's nothing in God. It isn't that one could say that God is empty, but God is empty of all form. God is full of bliss, full of love, full of the divine qualities, but empty of anything material. Now, on the other hand, the domain of matter, mother, the domain of the Divine Mother is the material domain, and that includes everything but the formless. So, whereas we think of, say, the angelic domains as being formless, and in some respects they are, they're not formless in the same way God is. They're still made of a more refined matter. Everything except the formless God could be said to be material. It's just that the matter is more and more refined as we progress. Now, to say that we progress begs the explanation that all of life in this journey from God to God progresses by a process of evolution, spiritual evolution. You know that Darwin said that the physical body evolves. Well, that's true enough, it does, but that's only part of the picture. The real part of the picture, the important part of the picture, is that the spirit evolves, we evolve. And again, all of the explanations I'm giving are metaphorical. It isn't really true that the spirit evolves. This personality right here, inside this body, evolves. It's a emanation of the spirit, projection of the spirit. It evolves. It goes up through the dimensions of life. The spirit itself, or the soul, does not evolve. It could be said to awaken, but again, it's all metaphorical. Something journeys through life, and it's this personality, this projection of God's own consciousness, that evolves, and it evolves from a place of unconscious awareness of its identity as God to conscious awareness. So once we become consciously aware that we're God, we return home. Now, Rumi had a very nice poem in which he talked about evolving from mineral to plant to animal to human, and he said he had one more stage to go, and that was the stage as an angel, and then he would return to nothingness, and he yearned for nothing more than nothingness, than to be dissolved. That's one way anyways, of describing the stages of evolution from material through plant, through animal, through human, through angelic, and back to God. But there are other ways of describing it. One could talk about dimensions, levels of existence. We here right now are in the third dimension, which is a dimension, while it's characterized by self-consciousness. And by self-consciousness, I mean the ability to make of myself an object of attention, but I can also make of anything an object of attention. I can even make of God an object of attention. And I can make of something in the distant past an object of attention, and something possibly existing in the future an object of attention. I can make an emotion an object of attention. So we humans are, and some animals as well maybe, are characterized by self-consciousness, the ability to use reflective consciousness to make an object of ourselves. Trying to remember something that flitted across my mind about our consciousness. If I remember it, I'll come back to it. So now we're well positioned to begin the Enlightenment process. And Al-Ghazali described the arc of existence as coming out from God and going around to God. The midpoint, say, is right here. I'm just learning how to use the video. Right here. And this midpoint would be the first realization we get that, in my view that is, that we are God. So the first realization, the first peak experience, the first enlightenment experience, whatever it is for anyone that suddenly makes them aware that we are more than we think we are God, or we are divine, or we are immortal, something that starts the whole line of inquiry into our true nature. That, I would say, is the apogee, the midpoint of the circle. Whereas before we were going away from God, from that moment on, I would say that we have begun our return to God. Just checking my list of things that I want to say on this video. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about the third dimension, which is what we're in right now, and dualistic consciousness and unitive consciousness. The third dimension. Now, by third dimension, I don't mean that it has height, depth, and width, or whatever the scientific discussion of it is. That's not what's meant by the third dimension. The third dimension refers to a ladder of consciousness. Remember, Jacob dreamt of a ladder of consciousness, which is characterized by self-consciousness and dualistic consciousness. Now, dualistic consciousness means that I see you and I as different, as separate. In fact, we're not. In fact, we are all one. But to have the experience, the deeply experienced point of view that we're all one, would mean that I had what state of consciousness called unitive consciousness, and that does not develop till the fifth dimension, and that is in effect where the shift in consciousness that's happening on the planet right now will take us. Now, you're probably saying, well, what about the fourth fourth dimension? The fourth dimension is known to anyone who's read afterlife literature, and it's called the astral plane, the plane of desire. That's the plane we go to after death, usually, and it's a wonderful place to be. We may be in the fourth dimension at this moment, or at least passing through it and experiencing it in some of its phases. It's still a plane of dualistic consciousness. So where we're headed as a result of the planetary shift in consciousness that's happening at this present time is not simply to another plane of dualistic consciousness, but to the first plane of unitive consciousness, and that is the fifth dimension. On the other side of life, on the planes of life after death, the fifth dimension would be called the mental plane, and it's widely known. I've written a book called New Maps of Heaven. I think you only have to Google that, New Maps of Heaven, to find the Earl, and that describes life on the other side of death. Actually, we never die, so the body dies, this dies, but we never die. We just keep progressing through lifetime after lifetime on our journey back to God. Reading about life after death is really very, very, very inspiring and interesting, and I encourage you to read New Maps of Heaven. It tells us a lot about what we can expect ahead, because when you're reading about life on the mental plane, you're reading about life in the fifth dimension. So we are moving from the third dimension to the fifth, and we're doing so in a gradual process. You may have noticed, for instance, that you're feeling happier these days, blissful, joyful, and that this is increasing. It's increasing as a result of energies that are being beamed to the planet from other sources, that are raising our consciousness levels. Now, sooner or later, we're going to bump up against the need to distinguish paradigms of knowledge. So far, the reigning paradigm on our planet is called empirical materialism, and it holds that only that which can be seen, heard, felt, touched, tasted, smelled is real. Now, this is a very limiting paradigm, because who we truly are is a soul, and that soul is not visible. It's visible on some dimension of life, but it's not visible to those who have physical eyes and live on the third dimension. So much of what I would ordinarily say, I cannot say if I inhabit the paradigm of empirical materialism. And I found this out at university. I was in 3 university PhD programs, and I just couldn't succeed in my studies. I couldn't break through so long as I stayed in the paradigm of empirical materialism. And finally, when I had my vision, which was during the years that I was doing a sociology PhD program at the University of BC, I realized I could no longer stay within the paradigm of empirical materialism, and I left the university. Much of what I'm talking about right now cannot be translated into the paradigm of empirical materialism. For example, we are being assisted in this planetary shift of consciousness by beings from other planets. I mean, you have only to look at YouTube to see the numbers of spaceships that are here now. And they have a role to play, a mission to play, and that's to help us with our shift. You may not know that they have taken down the cabal, the Illuminati, who plan to assume control of the planet, and we're well on their way, and plan to start a nuclear third world war by dropping a nuclear bomb on Iran. Surely you've heard newspaper story after newspaper story of Israel wanting to drop a bomb on Iran. The United States ferrying some nuclear bombs to Iran. Just think Minot Air Force Base, Barksdale Air Force Base, that was one of the incidents. And it's the galactics who have stopped them from being able to drop a nuclear bomb on Iran. In fact, no nuclear bombs on the planet will explode now. And it's because our star brothers and sisters are assisting us. You might want to watch the video called "I Know My Galactic Family Is Here, Do You?" because that discusses all of the facts around the help that we're receiving from our star brothers and sisters. So empirical materialism would not probably entertain discussions of them because their native dimension is higher than ours, and so they can, if they want, be invisible to us. They make themselves apparent to us, but that's not their native dimension. The third dimension is not their native dimension. They're all at least fifth dimension and often much, much higher. So I can't stay within empirical materialism, and I won't stay within empirical materialism. I've paid my dues, and I'm going to be ranging outside the empirical materialist paradigm. In August of 2012, I believe, the galactics, after clearing everybody out of the deep underground military bunkers that exist all over the planet, in which the Illuminati were planning to hide while nuclear war raged on the surface, and reduced the population from 7 billion to 500 million, the galactics, after withdrawing everybody from those facilities, blew them up. And what that means is that the Illuminati plan was finished. They also stopped weather warfare weapons like HARP, High Altitude Auroral Research Project, that was causing all the earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes. You notice that in the last year, we really haven't had very much severe weather, and that's because our galactic family has taken these weapons away from the cabal. So I don't know if you've noticed, but life is getting better on the planet, except in a few trouble spots like Syria. Regimes have fallen all over the planet, so Arab Spring brought down a number of regimes. The economy in Europe is teetering. It won't fall completely, but it will be replaced by a new economy. And you can read about that on the Golden Age of Gaia. And in addition, new governments are springing up that serve the people. Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma is now allowed to roam freely. So these are changes. These are real changes that are happening. And I could go on discussing other changes. Things are changing. They are improving. We're heading towards a planetary shift in consciousness that will take us out of dualistic consciousness. So out of seeing each other as separate and different and competing and feeling that we have to look out for number one and being greedy and exploitative, persecuting women, persecuting children, persecuting people who aren't of our faith, aren't of our nationality, aren't of our income class. All of that is changing. All of that is lifting. one cannot move from the third dimension to the fifth dimension and one cannot realize God without embracing the divine qualities. Hope that's not too much of a mouthful, but divine qualities are things like love, bliss, joy, courage, equanimity, detachment, devotion, discrimination. By that I mean discernment, primarily discernment between the real and the unreal. One cannot realize God without becoming like God, and to become like God is to act according to the divine qualities. That is the new paradigm. You may have heard it said that we're moving from the old paradigm to the new paradigm, and the old paradigm was dualistic. It was about eating somebody else's lunch before they ate your lunch. It was about attack and defense and nature being red in tooth and claw, social Darwinism, all the things that have practically ruined this world. The new paradigm is about cooperation, love, acceptance, being our brother's keeper, relieving homelessness, poverty, hunger. We are moving in that direction. We're moving in that direction rather fast. So we're embracing the new paradigm of love and truth and peace. World peace is returning to the earth. Those who refuse to embrace it, and that's a perfectly legitimate choice, will gradually be separating from the group, and they'll remain in third dimensionality. And those who accept the new paradigm, those who accept the shift in consciousness, open to it, and assimilate enough light to be able to comfortably live in a higher dimension, because it's uncomfortable living in a higher dimension if you haven't assimilated enough light. Those who open to it and assimilate the light, and it's not hard. This is not at all an elitist or exclusive process. On the contrary, it's an inclusive process there. All you have to do is choose it and open to the light. I mean, how is that difficult? Those who do will find their consciousness elevating and their point of view shifting to the fifth dimension. It's not that we're going to go anywhere in geographical terms. It's that our frequency will shift from that which would have us see third dimensional things and objects to that which would have us see and live among fifth dimensional things and objects. Many people will find themselves going much higher than the fifth dimension, some to the seventh, some to the ninth, some to the 11th. And those people primarily will be people who've come to assist with this planetary shift in consciousness. But I think if I go into those matters, it would make this video too long, and I don't want to do that. So perhaps go to the Golden Age of Gaia, or go to many other websites that are on the same topics, and there's a lot of literature available on these matters. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the notion of balance, because there are going to be an awful lot of very interesting, very paradigm shaking, very revolutionary, or maybe that's the wrong word, reformational, transformative, that's the word I'm looking for, very transformative events that are going to be happening fairly soon. One of them is called disclosure, and what it means is that the star brothers and sisters around the planet here to help us with this shift, who have brought the cabal to a standstill and are busy preparing the new economy, which will see us all relieved of poverty, and are helping us with the shift, beaming the light upon the planet and what have you. They will at some point make themselves known when they feel that the planet is sufficiently open to their presence, so that there will be no panic, no fear, no unpleasant incidents. We have to become accustomed to the thought that we're not alone in the universe, and that contrary to all of Hollywood's attempts to make us afraid of extraterrestrials, and Hollywood is aware that extraterrestrials exist, contrary to the representations of the galactic beings as predators and aliens and all manner of untoward shapes and sizes, they are not predatory. They are not ill-motivated. They are loving beings who scrupulously observe the natural laws, the universal laws, which we do not. So we have nothing to fear from them. We have everything to fear from our own corrupt politicians, corrupt law and order forces, some corrupt people in the military. I'm not saying all politicians or police officers or military personnel are corrupt, not by any stretch of the imagination, just some are. We have them to fear, but we have nothing to fear from our star brothers and sisters. We did, some decades ago, have things to fear from some galactic visitors who were abducting people. Yes, that's true. But all of that stopped many years ago because our star brothers and sisters came here and removed those negative aliens from the planet, from inside the planet. They lived underground, as anybody who's watched Phil, I think it's Phil Schechter, talk about the underground war with extraterrestrials. They lived just under the ground. I'm not talking about the Agarthans or the people who live in the inner earth, but I'm talking more about visitors from outer space. They are all gone, but disclosure will be quite an earth-shaking event, so to speak, because we'll then have to reassess all our knowledge. The paradigm of empirical materialism will be shown to be insufficient. It'll be a great awakening for us. And there will be other awakenings too. There will be the arrival of the new economy and the lifting of poverty from the earth. There will be the creation of new governments in many countries. Probably almost all countries will have new governments. No, President Obama is not a dark figure. On the contrary, he's a light worker and highly regarded by not only the Star Brothers and Sisters, but by all the Earth figures on other dimensions who are leading this whole transition, and by that I refer to the Ascended Masters. I shudder to mention the angels, but we're going to have to get used to it. Angels do exist, and they are overseeing this whole process. Archangel Michael is probably the leading entity in the shift that's occurring. So we're just going to have to get used to it. These beings do exist, and they are leading this transition. So when these events happen, and this is the last point I want to make on this video, I apologize for taking so long to do it, but the most important qualities for us are balance, calmness, openness. Those of us who know what's going on, those of us who are informed, those of us who realize the total process, and I would add that President Obama does know the total process. Some of the actions he's taking right now seem difficult to understand, but they are not when you understand the perspective behind them. I don't have time to explain some of the things which people at this moment are quite incensed about, but there is an explanation for it. The biggest explanation is we're right at the end of this reign of the cabal, so everything's going to change fairly soon, and President Obama knows it, and so there's no need to worry about things that look as if they're going awry. They're not going awry. The most important thing for us who know about this transition that's occurring is to remain balanced. If I were to use one word, choose one word, I'd say balance. Now, balance does not mean this side of the scale weighs the same as the other side of the scale, so they stay here. That is not the spiritual concept of balance. The spiritual concept of balance means remaining in the middle, remaining in the center, remaining in the heart. So not wildly gyrating. Let me see if I can get myself positioned on the video here. Not wildly gyrating out on the peripheries. Not upset, not delirious with excitement, not angry, not all the emotions and states of being that would have us be on our peripheries, but in the center, equanimous, detached, peaceful, tranquil, because the events that are going to be happening are going to cause, well, I'm being facetious, but they'll cause our hair to stand on end. Not that I have a lot of it. But they will challenge us. And what we need to do, those of us who are aware of what's going on, is to remain balanced, remain calm, provide explanations if we can. But just reassure people that this is all going according to a divine plan. Yes, it is. The Divine Mother's plan. And everything's going to be wonderful. We're going to be so blessed, so blissful, so joyful, so happy, so comfortable when we move further into this transition, that we'll forget all our troubles in a very short time. But the most important thing is to remain balanced, i.e. in the center, in equilibrium. If the ends of the teeter-totter are out here, it's very difficult doing this on a video because I move the wrong hand. But if the ends of the teeter-totter out here, when the teeter-totter is in the middle, if you can imagine walking in the middle to the fulcrum, then that would be being in balance. And being in balance means we need to clear our upsets rather than projecting our upsets outwards and saying, you made me angry. We'll need to be with them and allow them to percolate up and experience them through to completion, and then allow them to be released and disappear. And in fact, that's happening a lot lately. I could go on, but I think that's probably taxing your desire to be listening enough. I do thank you for listening. These are very, very important matters, and they need to be more generally known. So thank you very much for giving me your attention. Now, some resources: the Golden Age of Gaia, that's http:// all one word, goldenageofgaia.com. If you search on Steve Beckow, B-E-C-K-O-W, in little quotation marks, Boolean search, little quotation marks, and enter first contact, also in quotation marks, you'll go to a database on everything that's happening right now. If you want to read about life after death, again, new maps of heaven in quotation marks. If you want to read about enlightenment and the father, mother, and child, or as Hindus call it, Brahman, Atman, and Shakti, then go to the essays of Brother Anonymous. I needed to call myself Brother Anonymous for many years so that I could publish on the internet and not affect the company I worked for. A lot of my books have been published pseudonymously. So then once you're on the essays of Brother Anonymous, then go to From Darkness Unto Light. In fact, First Contact is on that site, New Maps of Heaven is on that site, and From Darkness Unto Light is on that site, and many other things. A database on gender persecution, some writings on the impact of automation. So thank you. It's been very enjoyable talking to you, and I hope this video helps orient you to what may have been some inexplicable things that are happening, reassure you and have you look forward to our further entry into the Golden Age of Gaia. Thank you.